The Silent Vigil, when the Mothman whispered tragedies in the darkness of Point Pleasant in the heart of the misty lands of West Virginia, where the Appalachians embrace ancient valleys, a legend was born in the shadows. A story that transcends simple regional folklore to become one of the most unsettling enigmas of the American imagination. This is the chronicle of the Mothman, the crimson-eyed entity that, they say, announced with its presence one of the region's greatest tragedies, the awakening of the legend. The small town of Point Pleasant, nestled on the banks of the Ohio River, was experiencing days of autumnal tranquility in 1966. The trees had already lost most of their leaves, and the frequently overcast sky formed a gray ceiling above the heads of its nearly 6,000 inhabitants. Nothing suggested that this peaceful village would go down in history as the birthplace of one of the most intriguing mysteries of the 20th century on the afternoon of November 12, 1966. 5 men were working in the Clendenin Cemetery when an unusual shadow projected over them. As they raised their eyes, they beheld something that defied any rational explanation. A humanoid figure, dark, with enormous wings spanning almost 10 feet, silently gliding above them. The being disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only terror as proof of its passage. 3 nights later, on November 15th, 2 young couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millette, were driving along the road near the former military installation known as the TNT area, an abandoned complex of World War II bunkers. The car's digital clock read approximately 11:30 p.m. when the headlights illuminated an impossible figure. It was like a man, but it wasn't a man, Roger Scarberry later reported to the local sheriff. It was almost 7 feet tall, with a robust chest like an athlete's, and 2 enormous wings folded on its back. But the eyes, my God, those red eyes that glowed like incandescent rubies. The creature, in a movement that defied known physics, took flight at a speed estimated by the witnesses at over 100 miles per hour, pursuing the vehicle to the city limits. The car reached dangerous speeds in their desperate attempt to escape. Only when they crossed the welcome sign to Point Pleasant did the entity disappear into the darkness. The city under surveillance, the reports from that night would be just the beginning. In the following weeks, dozens of local residents reported similar encounters. Mason County transformed into the epicenter of a phenomenon that quickly captured national media attention. Local journalist Mary Heyer, from the Athens Messenger newspaper, was one of the first to take the reports seriously and document them meticulously. Newell Partridge, a farmer from the Salem area, reported that his hunting dog, Bandit, disappeared on the same night he witnessed circular red eyes glowing near his barn. The animal, always loyal, never returned. Days later, Marcella Bennett went through one of the most terrifying encounters. While visiting friends near the TNT area, the creature emerged from behind the car, causing such panic that the woman fell to her knees, paralyzed by fear. Unable to run, it was as if it could read my mind, Bennett described in her statement to the police. When our gazes met, I felt that it knew everything about me. It wasn't hatred that emanated from those eyes, but a deep sadness, almost as if it was trying to communicate something terrible to me. Connie Carpenter, a young 18-year-old student, was driving to school at 10:30 in the morning when she spotted something unusual near the Ohio River. As she slowed down to observe better, she came face to face with the creature opening its enormous wings. What deeply marked her wasn't just the entity's appearance, but feeling momentarily hypnotized by the red eyes that seemed to penetrate her soul as the sightings multiplied. Other strange phenomena began to occur. Residents reported inexplicable interference on televisions and radios. Telephones rang with no one on the line. Domestic animals disappeared or were found mutilated in inexplicable ways. And more disturbing, many who witnessed the Mothman began to report vivid nightmares involving turbulent waters and collapsing metal structures. The silver omen for 13 months, the Mothman's presence became constant in Point Pleasant. Some residents came to consider the entity almost as a dark guardian, a vigilant presence that, despite the terror it caused, seemed to be there for some greater purpose. Others interpreted the sightings as omens of something catastrophic. Thomas Gordon, a local history professor, documented in his diary, "There's something in the air of Point Pleasant, a grim expectation, as if the entire town is holding its breath before a devastating thunder." And then, on December 15, 1967, exactly 13 months after the first sightings, the unthinkable happened. The Silver Bridge, a metal structure connecting West Virginia to Ohio over the Ohio River, was congested with rush hour traffic that Friday. At 5:04 p.m., witnesses heard a deafening rumble, followed by screams of horror. The bridge, built in 1928 and meant to support the weight of hundreds of vehicles simultaneously, gave way in a matter of seconds. Cars, trucks, and their occupants plunged into the icy waters of the Ohio. In total, 46 lives were taken in what became known as the Silver Bridge disaster. Subsequent investigations pointed to structural failures as the official cause of the collapse. A single support pin had failed, triggering a chain reaction that brought down the entire structure. But for many residents of Point Pleasant, the technical explanation was insufficient to justify the tragedy that befell them. Most intriguing, after the bridge disaster, Mothman sightings ceased completely. Beyond the myth, interpretations of the phenomenon, theories about the Mothman's nature and purpose are as varied as they are fascinating. Some cryptozoologists suggest that the creature could be an unknown species of giant bird, or even an isolated evolution of some primate that developed adaptive characteristics for flight. Proponents of this line often point to the sandhill crane, a large bird with reflective eyes, as a possible explanation. Ufologists, on the other hand, associate Mothman sightings with unidentified luminous phenomena reported at the same time in Point Pleasant. John Keel, author of The Mothman Prophecies, 1975, extensively documented this correlation, suggesting that the creature could be of extraterrestrial or interdimensional origin. Social psychologists propose an explanation based on collective hysteria, potentiated by the context of Cold War tensions and the atmosphere of uncertainty that permeated American society in the 1960s. The phenomenon would have been amplified by the effect of suggestion and sensationalist media coverage. There are also those who interpret the Mothman as a supernatural manifestation in omen, an angel of death, or even a Native American entity linked to the ancestral lands where Point Pleasant was built, the Shawnee, the indigenous people who inhabited the region before European colonization, had legends about winged creatures that served as messengers between worlds, the legacy of the Winged Watchman. Today, more than 5 decades after the events that terrorized West Virginia, the Mothman has transcended the status of a simple urban legend to become an integral part of Point Pleasant's cultural identity. In 2002, the city erected a 12-foot metal statue in honor of the creature, created by sculptor Bob Roach. The work, with its open wings and reflective red eyes, has become a tourist attraction and a meeting point for paranormal enthusiasts. Annually, thousands of visitors converge on the city during the Mothman Festival, an event that celebrates the legend's legacy with lectures, historical tours, and themed competitions. The Mothman Museum, opened in 2005, preserves documents, accounts, and artifacts related to the sightings. The cultural impact of the legend has extended far beyond the borders of West Virginia. John Keel's book was adapted for cinema in 2002, starring Richard Gere, and since then various documentaries, television programs, and literary works have explored the phenomenon. The Mothman has become a pop culture icon, appearing in games, comics, and being referenced in series such as Supernatural and The X-Files. But for the older inhabitants of Point Pleasant, those who lived through the days of terror between 1966 and 1967. The Mothman was never just entertainment. Mary Millett, one of the original witnesses, stated in an interview in 2016, at age 70, "I know what I saw that night. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't hysteria. It was something that didn't belong to our world, something that was trying to tell us something that we couldn't understand until it was too late. The silence that persists modern science has still not been able to provide definitive explanations for the Mothman phenomenon. The accounts remain consistent over time, and many of the original witnesses maintained their stories unchanged until the end of their lives, refusing financial offers for retractions. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the legend is its persistence in other parts of the world. Reports of similar creatures emerged before other tragedies. In Russia, days before the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986. In Mexico, preceding devastating earthquakes. And more recently, sightings were reported near the I-35W bridge in Minneapolis, months before its collapse in 2007. Is the Mothman a warning from nature? A visitor from another dimension trying to alert us about imminent catastrophes? Or is it just the manifestation of our collective fears, the personification of our anxiety in the face of a world that, despite all our technology and knowledge, remains unpredictable and often devastating? The shadows that hover over Point Pleasant keep their secrets. Meanwhile, on especially dark nights, some residents still claim to hear the beating of giant wings over the Ohio River, as if the silent vigil had never really ended. Final reflections between belief and skepticism. The Mothman case represents a fascinating study on the intersection between folklore, collective psychology, and traumatic historical events, regardless of the reality behind the sightings. It's undeniable that the legend fulfilled an important social function. It provided a narrative framework through which a community processed its collective pain after a devastating tragedy. Perhaps the true power of the Mothman doesn't reside in its physical existence, but in its capacity to personify our ancestral fear of the unknown and our eternal search for signs and omens in a universe that often seems indifferent to human suffering. In a world increasingly explained by science and reason, stories like the Mothman's remind us that we still inhabit the frontiers of mystery, that in the folds between the light of knowledge and the darkness of the unknown, there is still room for silent wings and eyes that shine like rubies in the night, observing, waiting, perhaps trying to tell us something that we're not prepared to understand. And while the metal statue in Point Pleasant keeps its eternal vigil over the new bridge that replaced the Silver Bridge, a question persists in the air like a whisper. If the Mothman returned today, would we be willing to listen to its warning?